Well, it's my turn. Well, I think I introduced myself in the beginning, so I don't need to introduce myself again. Very happy to have been able to, together with the Euromed Feminist Initiative, I'm confused, to organize this meeting so we could talk about very urgent questions in the region. Here we heard Arab Spring. Rula said she doesn't like that, and somebody else said so-called Arab Spring. Well, then what happened in the Middle East 3 years ago brought so much happiness, so much joy, I think, to almost anybody in the world who really cares for freedom, for equality, for justice. Because everybody knew the situation in those societies: dictatorship, state corruption, torture, oppression, such a big gap between rich and poor, poverty, all of that, from Egypt, Tunisia, the whole North African countries, Syria, Libya, and we'll just go. Everybody was so happy and saying this is the first time this happened in the history. I have to be honest with you, I was very happy, but I was very pessimistic. And I'm so upset that my pessimism came through, because the way things were going, you could see that it's not going to end up where people really wanted to end up. People came to the street, very clearly said what they wanted. They wanted freedom. They all said freedom. They wanted equality, we just heard it. They wanted justice. And they wanted prosperity. And that baguette in Tunisia, the first picture came, I think was very symbolic of what people wanted. And what happened? Egypt. They brought Mubarak, such a strong man of the region. He almost looked like a king in the region lately. They brought him down. Democracy, Muslim Brotherhood came up. And then people went against Muslim Brotherhood, the Saudi army now. What's happening in Egypt is a Mubarak regime of 10 years ago, solidified. So actually, the situation of people in Egypt, men or women, not only didn't become better, it became worse. After having so many killed, tortured, suffering, maimed, now they have a regime just like Mubarak at the time that Mubarak was strong, not like 3 years ago that he was very weak. Tunisia is a little bit better, but still far from what really people wanted. They could get rid of Al-Nassat or Salafis or whatever. They have a constitution, but we'll have to see what happens. Libya and Syria, where the Western governments, who are called state terrorists, United States, NATO, Israel, all of those, where they could not manipulate politically as well as they could in Egypt and Tunisia. They were like allied with Tunisia and with Egypt politically, but with Libya and Syria it was a bit different, so we witnessed a civil war. No one talks about Libya now. Yesterday we were talking in the hotel and Rura was said, yeah, Kobane, but no one talks about another part of Syria. I said, no one talks about Libya. No one even mentions the name of Libya. And Libya is awful what's happening. Actually, one of the sheikhs decides to destroy the airport in Benghazi. He just takes it, destroys it, takes it for himself. It's just like at the time of Muhammad, the way they're dealing with the country. The situation of women is by far worse, and freedom, equality, none of that. Really look at Libya now, it's much worse than 3 years ago. And no one talks about Libya. Why? Because, as Lillian mentioned so correctly, they said there was democracy. NATO intervened ISIS army went in, brought the Islamists to power, took them out of this box, ballot box, and now no one talks about Libya anymore. And to be honest with you, I'm happy that NATO did not get involved in Syria, because it would be the same thing as Libya. They would get involved, they bring out Al-Jihad or Al-Nusrat or ISIS or Daesh or one of these, and then they would say, well, that's democracy. And no news. Would be blackout on the news as it is on Libya, just like you were mentioning so well, how they decide what kind of news they want today be published. And Iraq is from 2003. They were forced to leave. The Allied forces, America, Britain, and their allies. What happened? All of a sudden, a monster came called ISIS. They've got a good excuse to go back. First, only bombing. Now what they're doing? They're going to take 1,500 army men. Now they want to train. I'll promise you here, in 2 months' time, training will turn again to fighting, because they have to support human rights in Iraq. Didn't they go there because of democracy in 2003? They said, we need to get rid of the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein has piled up there, and we need democracy. What happened to Iraq? That's why I get scared when I see Syrian oppositions, they talk about international intervention. When we've had Afghanistan, when we had Iraq, when we've had Libya. Do you really want NATO to come and bomb Syria? Do you think only Al-Nusrat and Al-Jihad would be bombed? Just now that they're bombing Iraq, how many civilians have been killed because of the bombing? They're justified because they want to get rid of ISIS. So if some people die, that's just the price to pay. So, I ran to this point very quickly because I don't think the answer to the region for peace, freedom, equality, a more just society is the intervention of the international community, so-called. I don't think so. We've seen what they do. We've seen how they ruin. We've seen how they destroy. And we've seen how they create monsters. And they say it's all culture. They create ISIS and they say we are Islamists. They create Al-Qaeda. Who doesn't know bin Laden was on the payroll of CIA? And all of a sudden Al-Qaeda became such a monster that they had to destroy and ruin Afghanistan and Iraq to get rid of it. I'm not that sort of traditional anti-imperialist that you think, so I'm defending Assad, by no means. But what I think is people of Syria, people of Libya, people in the region, they have to get rid of Assad. They tried to help, that's what they said. Their intervention was to give arms to groups like Al-Nusrat, Al-Jihadis, and ISIS. Where did they get the weapons? Where did they get weapons to start a civil war in the country? Assad was killing people, but the war has two sides. One side is Assad's government, the other side was all these Islamic groups. Where did they get the arms from? ISIS is supported totally by Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Do you think Saudi Arabia would even drink water without the green light from the US? Do you really think so? Do you really think it's now Saudi Arabia is a regional power, decides on its own what to do? The Turkish government is part of NATO, is supporting ISIS. So I know politically it's very complicated and sometimes you feel desperate what to do. I've been fighting for a society with equality, freedom, prosperity, and for women's equality. I first say, you know how ancient I am. For the past, 35, 40 years of my life. We've gone through a revolution which was defeated in Iran in 1979. You all heard about it. We had sort of same story as Egypt, maybe you could call it. We had dictatorship, we got rid of it, and then we got something much worse in its place, which was the Islamic government. And they told us, people in Iran are Islamists. Actually, Nasser said the Islamic culture of Iran and Turkey, I would like to make a correction to that. We don't have an Islamic culture. We have an Islamic state, not an Islamic culture. And they brought Khomeini to Iran. Believe me, it was not people of Iran who wanted Khomeini. It was the Guadeloupe Conference who decided, Iran being a neighbor to Soviet Union, they need an Islamic state. From one day to another, BBC had become spokesperson of Khomeini every day in Tehran. We were listening to BBC radio, Voice of Liberty then, which is now Voice of America, and you know what we were hearing? All the declarations of Khomeini, every single night. Khomeini's declarations were broadcast by BBC, by Deutsche Welle, by Radio France, and by Radio Liberty. And from one day to another, Khomeini became a leader. 99% of the young people in Iran didn't even know Khomeini. And they did the same thing to Egypt. They did the same thing to Tunisia. And they're doing it with civil war to Syria and Libya. So I want to go to the point. We need a society which respects and guarantees equality, freedom, prosperity for all its citizens. In such society, we could talk about women's freedom or women's equality. We cannot have women's freedom in a society which is under dictatorship, can we? No way. And just because some women are there doesn't mean women are equal. Hillary Clinton is a woman, is criticizing Obama that did not get involved militaristically. That's now that she wants to become a president. Ashton in European Union. There are a lot of women now who are running the world, and they support the same system as the men do. So it's not what your gender is, it's what your worldview is. I would like to go to that point. Your worldview, what kind of society you want, what is your blueprint for that society, and then how we can bring that society about. Now I just want to mention something about Kobane, why I think Kobane is important. I don't think Kobane is important because I'm in love with arms. No. But I've had arms on my shoulder 2 years when I was in Kurdistan. I never shot it. It was just there. I'm not romanticizing armed struggle. I'm not idealizing armed struggle. But there is one point, in order to bring peace, you have to fight. If someone is attacking you, attacking your family, attacking your house, we can just sit there and say, I'm pacifist, I'm peaceful, I'm not going to fight? Because it's better for us. They kill everybody, they rape everybody, take what they want. It doesn't work that way. You cannot stand in front of ISIS and say, I'm peaceful. It's a joke.
Yes, it was not my...
No, I'm not saying your point. I'm just trying to say I'm not idealizing armed struggle. But there is one day that you have to take arms in order to bring peace. At the time of World War II, many people took arms to fight against fascism.
In Spain also.
You had the civil war in Spain. They were defeated, but they had to fight for what they thought was right. In Kurdistan, in Iran, in 1979, after the Islamic regime came to power, everywhere else, we still had some sort of freedom. So I'm a left, I'm a communist. So we fought for what we had, but when the regime decided to attack Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan, people fought. For 24 days in Sanandaj, the capital of Kurdistan, Kalimah definitely knows, people fought with nail and tooth against the regime which was bombing them. There are few people sitting here who were involved in that war. Irash Farzad there, Fahime, and I don't know who else, they were there, they were fighting. That's how they could push the Islamic regime back, and that's how we could actually try to prolong our freedom for some years, because there was an armed struggle in Kurdistan against the regime. And no one idealized that armed struggle. It's a question of, there is a time you need to take up arms. And then, why then women are not equal to men? Should men do our fights for us? Is that feminist? Should men fight and we sit home? No. The equality is that we both fight for our freedom, and when we don't need the gun, we both put the gun down. That's why Kobane becomes important, because exactly when the whole world is desperate, when the whole world gets up in the morning to hear the news of cutting heads, tearing stomachs, raping children, selling women as slaves, there is one small town has taken arms and would not let ISIS get in. Isn't that important? Surely it's important. And I think the fact that so many people came to the streets all over the world to defend was not because they were armed. Peshmergas in Turkey, Kurdistan in Turkey, they have been armed for ages. No one came to the streets because they saw that's where the answer is. That's how you can get rid of ISIS. Not by bringing American soldiers back to Iraq. And that's why actually international community kept quiet for 1 month, said nothing about Kobane. The whole month of September we heard nothing. And then once the social media spread the news, put the pictures up, they were forced to say something. Just 2 days before America decides to bomb ISIS around Kobane, John Kerry said Kobane is not our problem. And then they had to change because that was bad. The Iraqi Kurdistan's government took 1.5 months to do anything in defense of the people of Kobane. And finally they sent 150 Peshmergas. So it's not a national question, it's not because they're Kurds, it's because they're standing for some very important values, which is equality, which is freedom, which is getting rid of ISIS, which is just a monster. That's why I think Kobane became so important. That's why Kobane took so much support. In Iran, people just came to the streets day after day in support of Kobane because they could see the situation. They called Islamic regime ISIS of Iran. They could see the connection, and for them, they give them so much hope that when the government threw acid at women in different cities, people came to the street to fight against the regime to defend women. And I suppose, see, I quite agree with Lillian when she says in Vietnam, there were all these women fighting, and once the war was finished, there was no woman. In Algeria, we say the same thing. It wasn't really armed struggle in that case in Algeria, but women were very active in the independence movement, the nationalist movement in Algeria in the 60s. What happened? Women were sent back home. Everywhere this has happened, yes. But what it is here, I think there was a difference. They had to actually show that this, I think the law that I just mentioned was passed in Jazire Canton, was as a recognition of the role of women, a recognition of the civilized world, what they want, because everybody was so happy to see women are fighting ISIS, not because they want to glorify it, it's because they know Islam is the main Islamic movement there. I'm not saying every Muslim, but Islamic movement in the region is the main enemy of women, and now women are fighting against one of its representatives. That's why people became happy. Even when it comes to Iran, about 10 years ago, we talked about that a revolution in Iran could be very much a women's revolution because of this dichotomy that exists between the women's movement and the regime which is Islamic and which is defends gender apartheid, the veil, and all the rest of it. That's why I think it's important, and that's why now this piece of legislation that they have is so important, and we should support it so much. So I'm going to end it, and we're going to have a debate. There's a lot to talk about, but when people defend international intervention, and then the only way you put forward is just go lobby the Western governments and have international intervention, I start getting very scared.
Really?
Scared, because I can see what happened in Iraq, what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Libya, could also happen in Syria. I don't think that's the way out. We should discuss about some other kind of methods to see how we can bring about a free, equal society which respects all its citizens' rights and equality and prosperity. Thank you so much.